Okay, there we go. And you're free to do introductions and begin.
Awesome. I guess I should start presenting my screen. Cool. Let me know when that comes through.
Looking good.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thanks for having me tonight, or this afternoon for me. I'm Josh King. I'm going to be talking about a module that I maintain called Burnt Toast, and how you can use it to step up your notification game. I'll get into this in a bit, but it is a more it gets into the advanced use cases for Toast notifications. I do have a link to a more basic talk that I've done in the past, which has the really basic stuff in it. So like I said, I'm Josh King. If you're detecting an accent, I'm from New Zealand, down in the Southern Hemisphere. I'm a sysadmin at Tribe. We're an MSP, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP. You can find me on Twitter at WindowsNZ, and my blog is toastit.dev. You might pick up a theme that toast has sort of become my niche, and I'm leaning into it. So first of all, there's this toast.click QR code down the bottom right of this slide that takes you to the basics that are a presentation of the basics, which I mentioned before. But even though this is a more advanced talk, so to speak, I did want to quickly cover off what exactly we're talking about when I say toast. And unfortunately, we're not talking about this sort of toast, which would be my go-to breakfast. Instead, we're talking about these. Most, if not all, modern operating systems have them in some form or another, and the official name for these are called toast notifications. So the examples on screen there is an older Android picture, one from Mac OS, and of course Windows 10. They are a modal UI element that are meant to display timely pieces of information and ideally actionable pieces of information. They don't persist they don't persist on screen if they're not touched within a certain period of time. Depending on the scenario, they disappear into some sort of collection. So like in Windows, there is the Action Center, and on, say, Android, you've got to pull down the notification shade and you can see all the old notifications sitting in there. So then further on from that, what's Burnt Toast? So Burnt Toast is a PowerShell module I wrote for displaying, for allowing you to leverage these notifications within Windows 10 and consequently Server 2019 as part of your PowerShell scripts using native PowerShell code. It is available on the gallery, and despite what that screenshot says, it doesn't actually have 14.2 million downloads, but it makes for really good screenshots. There is an issue with the download stats on the gallery at the moment, so I don't actually know how much it's gotten, but it's not even over 1 million yet. So I had a lot of fun tracking that number going up when the gallery was having issues. So why did I create Burnt Toast? So behind the scenes, and we're going to see a few examples of this, toast notifications are just XML documents. The XML describes the toast and their contents, and then that's passed on with some metadata to Windows API. Windows then shows the toast notification. Now, you can write that XML by hand if you want, Well, you can use a number of libraries out there to create them as well. I'm actually using a C# library, or I guess it's technically not specifically. I'm using a .NET library within Burnt Toast to achieve this. But of course, no one wants to work directly with XML, so then Burnt Toast generates that and abstracts all of the guts of the problem away. Now, in large environments where you might want to show Toast notifications to all of your end users, you don't actually have to install Burnt Toast on everyone's machine. You can just use Burnt Toast to author the XML and then use that as a reusable payload across your network. And this toast.click link down here, toast.click/no-burnt-toast, is a blog article about exactly that. Basically storing the XML on a file share and pointing at that when you were sending your notification. So that's enough slides. Literally, I think the slide after this one is a thank you slide. So let's get into demos and look at some Toast. So I did say we're going to get straight into the advanced stuff. This is our starter one. It looks a little bit daunting, but don't worry, it's not actually that bad. I'll walk through it line by line and explain what it's all doing. So the first thing here is we've got an app logo. This is what... So the app logo is the logo for the application generating the toast. By default with Burnt Toast, or by default, that is Windows PowerShell when you're using this module. So you would see a small Windows PowerShell logo on the side of your toast. It is small, and it's a lot nicer to overwrite that with your own image, and that's what this app logo does. In fact, it's literally called an app logo override. And in order to create that, you use the new BT image function. Give it a source, so that's where that's literally where the file lives, and then you tell it what type of image it is. So we've got app logo override, then we do it again for a hero image. Because it's so long, the source I've split out into its own variable. This time we say hero image, and we'll see this when I show the toast, but the hero image is literally huge and sits on top of the toast. You can also do inline images where you don't provide a switch at the end and just a source, and those show in the body of the toast notification. Then we've got 2 lines of text. I should have updated this. There we go. So we've got 2 lines of text, one saying hello SoCal, and then the second one saying this is fairly simple toast, all things considered. The order that you supply these later on does matter. The first one they show an order of what you supply them, and the first one is always bold, so it looks a bit like a heading. And in fact, that's exactly what it is. And then finally, we specify some audio. So there is a bunch of default Windows sounds that you can do. There's mail, reminder, IM, mail. The mail and reminder ones will sound very familiar to you if you use Outlook. There's also call and alarm sounds, which will be familiar to you if you've ever used a Windows phone. So armed with all of this stuff, we've got our app logo, hero image, 2 pieces of text, and some audio. We then have to bind that all together, or bind most of that all together. And we do that with new BT binding and specify some children. Children are just our text elements and could be inline images as well. The hero image and app logo have their own inputs into this because they're their own special cases. But you can provide, I believe, 3 pieces of text. Well, strictly speaking, you can provide more pieces of text, but only the first 3 will be shown. And again, the order that you provide them in, so text one first is the one that I want to be my heading. Then my hero image, then my app logo. So that creates a binding object. That goes into a visual object, and you'll see where all these names come from in a second. And then finally, we end up with a content object. This is where, so we've gone from binding, passing that into the visual, then we've got a visual object, we pass that into the content. Alongside the content, we've got the audio. So that hides off in its own little area. And finally, we submit it. Just before I show that, I mentioned sounds and Windows sounds. If they're not working for you, one of the Windows 10 updates turned off a lot of sound themes. And if you want to get them back, there's a link here to do that. So enough babble. I don't talk through all of them quite as much as this one. It's just being the first one and being so big, it's kind of daunting to look at. So we run this. I guess I can bring that up a bit. What this progress bar down here is doing, it's actually downloading these images. There we go. This one here is actually huge. And what I do behind the scenes with Burnt Toast is if you reference an image on the internet, I grab a copy of it and save it into your temporary temp files. And if you reference it again, while it's still in your temp files, it'll just use the temp version of it rather than downloading it again. So you'll only see that stuff the first time you call a big image. But to go through the bits, here's my app logo. It's actually a nice little animated GIF thing. And because I've overridden the app logo, so remember, normally that would be the Windows PowerShell logo. Because I've overridden it, it's put the text down here. That tells me what app it's come from. Then I've got my hero image, which is the nice big thing up the top there. I've got my two pieces of text, with the first one being bold. I don't know if I heard that when it came up. Might have been because I was talking over myself. But there should have been a sound that sounded like the Outlook new email sound. So let me click that away. Behind the scenes, this is what the XML looked like. So you'll remember we've got binding, visual. Toast is the wrapper that goes around it. I've just called it content because it's the content of the XML. And you can see why visual and audio went in side by side, because here's our visual element and here's our audio element. And of course, there it says mail. Got our 2 lines of text. And here you can see that the images have ended up in my local temp file folder. And if I scroll across, this one's my hero image, and this one's my app logo override. So all of those bits and pieces that you were seeing in PowerShell all map through into this XML. And spoiler alert, we get down to the third example, and then I stop showing you the XML and just give you a walkthrough of how to extract it yourself. So let's get on to, oh, actually, let me do something here. I'm going to show this one again. Oh, I did hear it, it's just really quiet. Now, if I don't mouse over it, it disappears in 4 or 5 seconds. There we go. So that might not be long enough depending on what you're doing. So that's where we can specify the duration for our toasts. So here, again, we've got a app logo override, no hero image this time, but I do have 3 pieces of text, so stay a while. Some toasts need to stay on screen longer than others, and you can crank up their duration. I am using different sound, again, providing the children in the order that I want them to show. But the key difference here is this dash duration long. And that's on the BT content thing. And that tells Windows that it needs to keep the toast on screen for an extended period of time. I think it's a multiplier of ×4. So there is a setting deep within the settings app where you can say how long to show a toast on screen for. The default's 5 seconds, and I believe when you put duration long, it goes to 20. And if you crank up the amount of time for a normal toast to show on screen, the long duration one is just longer still. So run all that. I won't mouse over it. You can see my GIF is there again. I've got my 3 lines of text. And if I keep talking, eventually it'll go away. But the key thing here is it stayed on screen for longer.
Can you set a specific duration as the user of the module?
So, no, you can set an expiration time somewhere. Actually, it'll be down here. You can set an expiration time, and that's when it'll completely be removed from your system. So if it's still on screen, it'll disappear at that time, but you can't make it stay longer. Like you can't say leave it on screen for exactly 2 hours and it'll stay on screen for 2 hours, unfortunately. There is a bit of, actually, before I get into that, there is a bit of a hack, two things you can do to get around that. Oh, and sorry, that expiration time lets you set a date time for when it's no longer valid and should be removed. The thing there, so what you could do is go, say, now plus 2 minutes. You got to remember that it could take a bit of time for it to actually show. So then you're eating into how long it shows. It's just one of those quirks. The XML on that all looks basically the same. We've got text, we've got an image. The difference is under toast, there's now a property parameter. Forget what they're called in XML, but we've got an argument that's set to long. So that's literally all that duration thing changes. It's got 2 valid options, long and short's the default. So really there's almost no point in specifying it specifically. Now, if that 20 seconds isn't long enough, there's the option of sort of trying to force it to stay on screen forever. Yeah, and I say there, when you absolutely have to get a message across, play up the scenario. So there's a concept with toasts called scenarios, which tell Windows what sort of situation the toast is being shown for. And this example has a incoming call scenario. And if I get rid of that, there, well, default, reminder, incoming call, and alarm. So if you've played with Focus Assist and you've seen the 2 settings other than off, one of them is alarms only. If you set your scenario to alarm, that'll break it through Focus Assist, which is pretty handy. But I'm going to set it to incoming call. What this tells Windows is that the toast is coming from some sort of app that handles incoming calls, like maybe Teams or a soft phone application, and that someone's actually trying to get in, someone's actively on the other end of a call trying to get in touch with you. And so what Windows tries to do is keep the toast on screen as long as that person's trying to call you. The outcome of which is the toast screen stays on screen for, I think it's like upwards of 5 minutes. And it will default to one of these looping sounds. Oh yeah, I guess I should touch on that as well. There are call and alarm sounds, 10 of each. So this is call 10. They live under the subsection called looping. Actually, I wonder. BT audio source, if I've got those in the. Yeah, it's hard to see them though in Visual Studio, but there is IntelliSense for all of those. There's the short ones. but there's all of these looping ones here. And what those are is when you provide the dash loop switch, Windows just keeps playing that sound, which is a really good way of getting your user's attention. So if I run that with a looping sound in the incoming call scenario, I'm not going to leave this on screen forever, and I can hear that. It's very quiet on my end. I don't know what it's like on your end. But like I say, this will stay on screen for about 5 minutes. Or at least 5 minutes is as long as I've got. I'm not sure if I've actually let it run to conclusion in the past. But I'll get rid of that. So that's without getting into something that we'll see down here in examples 6 and 7. That's probably the easiest way to have a toast on screen for ages. Yeah, no, I think that's a fair statement, is setting the scenario to incoming call. In theory, alarm should also be a long-running scenario, but for whatever reason at the moment, that's not working for me. So just be aware of that. And this will be the last one we actively look at the XML of. But you can see now, instead of duration, so you'll notice we didn't specify duration at all. If you set the scenario to incoming call, it implicitly sets the duration to long anyway, so there's no need to specify it as well, and it has no material outcome. But we do see scenario equals incoming call, and our audio, remembering looping, is also set to loop equals true. So that's the last XML file that I have pre-prepared. So example 4 is, how do we actually get the get to the XML if we want to export it out? So let me keep this open. Look at this. So we ended up with this content.1, this content1 object. And that has a method on it called getContent. So if I call that, we get some XML output, and just to make it easier to read, that's what it looks like when it's all properly indented. Now, what you'll notice is, unlike what I was showing you here, text, there are these curly braces around each text element. That gets into something we'll see in, which one is it? Example 6. For something that we can do to dynamically replace strings. But most of the time we don't want that. So we have to clean it out ourselves. And normally this is handled within the Burnt Toast module. But when you're running getContent, you don't benefit from that, so you got to do it yourself. So it all looks like gobbledygook in there, but the end result is nice clean text, no square brackets, no curly brackets around all the text, and the result looks like what I was showing you in the previous examples. So then, armed with that clean content, in fact, let me grab that because I forgot to change it. In fact, no, I'll leave it as content1. So this part here shows you how to take XML from, in this case, it's coming from that object. It could be coming from a file that I've written to the file system and read in. But basically, this is how you would manually send a toast without using Burnt Toast. So you have to have an app ID, which this is the one for Windows PowerShell. I should note that you can find all the app IDs on your system by running get start apps. So if you wanted it to come up on behalf of Cortana, you would put in that one. So in theory, you can impersonate any app. Then what you've got to do is create a new XML document and load the XML string into that document. Then you create a toast notification, which is sitting under this .NET class. And you use the notification manager to create a notifier, which shows your toast. Man, that's a mouthful. But the end result, you pass in your toast object against your app ID and you get a toast. So if I run that, get my toast, and because I left in the curly braces, we can see the end result on screen there. Still with the same sound. Now, this particular example only works with PowerShell 7.1. There is a couple of extra lines you would need to include for previous versions, and it's just for loading the WinRT, the Windows RT types that you need, which you no longer need, and in fact can't even use in 7.1. But yeah, because you've got to load the WinRT stuff, and that's covered under the No Burnt Toast blog post as well. So definitely go and read that. 7.1 thing makes it a lot tidier of an example. So now we get on to some potentially real world scenarios that you might find yourself in. Say you've sent a toast, and for whatever reason, the information on it is no longer relevant, and potentially it's a bad idea to leave the old information in place, so you want to update it. What you can do is you can give your toast notification a unique identifier, and then if you send a new toast with the same unique identifier as a previous toast, it completely replaces it. So the old toast is ripped from existence and the new toast is sent to replace it. So nice and simple, I've just got 2 lines of text and a unique identifier, which I'm splatting at this new burnt toast notification function. This function is the more user-friendly way of getting into toast notifications. It sort of handles all the grunt work. So you'll notice all I'm doing here is providing strings to a text parameter. I'm not having to call new BT text. And there's things like the app logo where I literally just put in the path. I don't have to call new image, new BT image, and then dash app logo. But there's only so much that I can squeeze into one function. So sometimes you've got to split out into the more advanced functions. Anyway, so we're splitting the text and unique identifier at new burnt toast notification. Then I'm changing the second line of text, it being at index 1 under text, to change it from this is the first example to this is the second example, and then again changing it to this third example. So what I'll do, and then each time, so I'm updating the hash table and then sending through a new toast. So what I'll do, send through this first toast, and then while it's still on screen, so it's currently saying the first example, while it's still on screen, send through another. And you'll see it had a weird sort of animation there where it disappeared and then sort of came in from the bottom of the screen. It's very odd. But now that it's left the screen, I can run the third example, which then shows on screen again. This is great for sparse updates of information. So you definitely don't want to do things rapidly. You end up with carry on. But it's also good for ensuring that the end user gets the updated information, because it always comes through as a new toast, which means even if the users dismiss the previous toast and it's no longer in the action center or it's no longer on screen, they'll get the new one. That's replacing toast. The other option is updating toast. And this is where we get into the curly braces. So those curly braces are for a thing called data binding. And effectively what that is everything in the toast between those curly braces are a placeholder. And those placeholders can be anything. They can be any string. They just have to match some given piece of text in your data binding. So here, and you do still have to use unique IDs. This time I'm providing it in a variable, just because of how I've structured the examples here. But then I've got this data binding, and I've got two keys in there, heading placeholder and text placeholder, with some strings that I actually want to display in my toast notification. Then when I'm calling my new notification with the function, against text, I put in those two placeholders in the order that I want them to show in the toast. So obviously my heading is first and then my text is second. And you'll note when I double click on them, it lights up the key from my data binding. So this key has to show in my toast. Otherwise it'll, so say if I misspelt this or put a 2 on the end, because this and this no longer match, this would show up as raw text of just heading placeholder 2, and I wouldn't be able to update it after the fact. So they have to match at the time when you create your new toast. Then again, we've got our unique identifier, and then there's this data binding parameter where I'm providing that hash table. So that'll create my first toast, and I'm not going to send it to screen just yet because I'll talk through the update part. So here I've got my data binding hash table, and I'm going to change just the text placeholder like I did before. So I'll change it from this as the first example to the second example. Then instead of sending a new toast with that command, I use update BT notification with the identifier and with the data binding. So I can't send any new placeholders through, so I can't add more text. All I can do is specify the ID of my notification and update my data binding. And it turns out there was an issue when I was doing this, so I've had to put error action silently continue. It does work. I just get a random error message that I had forgotten to deal with in the current version of Burnt Toast. So what I'm going to do is I'll run this for my new toast notification, then I'll update it. And we'll do what I did before, let the second update head off screen, and then I'll do the third one, and we'll see how this update thing differs from the replace. So here's the first toast. We can see this first example line of text. Now I'll run the update, and without any stupid animations, it's dynamically changed to the second example. And because second is longer than first, it's ended up on 2 separate lines. Now, if I let it go off screen, I'll run the 3rd update, and you'll see I've got a message here saying succeeded, which means my update was accepted. But I didn't get a notification back on screen. So what happened? Well, the updates, if I get rid of my start menu, oh, come on. I guess I'll leave the start menu there. So we can see that the update did update the toast, but it did it while it was hidden away in the Action Center. It didn't interrupt me as the user with a brand new toast notification. So what this is good for is rapid updates, but you do have to be careful about the state. So we're worried about user land here, so we have to worry about the state that how the user manages their notifications. So let's say I've sent through a new toast and I've updated it once, but then me as the user goes along and goes, okay, and I click it. That toast has now been actioned and it's not in my Action Center. Now, if I go ahead and try and update it again, I get a message saying notification not found. So because I actioned it, the notification no longer lives on my system, which means there's nothing to update. So, you know, that information's gone. Or rather, that toast is gone. There's nothing to update, so you can't give the user the new information. So that's what the replace has over the update, is you can't always guarantee that the end user is going to get the information that you're wanting to get to them. You can use a function called get BT history. If it was working, that's another one I need to fix. It's related to this issue. That's a bugger. Get BT history, when it's working, shows you all of the toast notifications that are either currently on screen or in the Action Center, or with a scheduled toast switch, shows you any snoozed or scheduled toasts. So what you could do is query your unique identifier. And if the toast exists, update it. If it doesn't, send a new one, if that's the workflow you were going for. The progression from that is you can update more than just text. So you can display progress bars on your notifications. And one thing you likely want to do with a progress bar is update it, so you can see its progress trucking along. And in order to do that, you could replace your notification. But as we've seen, updating them rapidly isn't a nice user experience. So what we can do is use data bindings to update our progress bars. So we can create progress bars with new BT progress bar, and they have a couple of options to customize them. So there's a title. That's the text that sits above the progress bar. Then there's a status. That's what sits under the progress bar. And then there's the value. That says what the percentage represented from 0 to 1. So like 0.5 is 50%. The percentage through the current task. And also, if you want to, there is a value display. So say if you were working through 500 users, instead of saying 50%, you could say 250 of 500 users, if you wanted to make the percentage actually mean something more to the user than just a raw percentage. In this case, I'm using placeholders, which are all in my data binding. So I've got both a parent title and a child title. I've got a parent status and a child status. And I've got a parent value and a child value. Again, got a unique ID. And this time I'm providing some static text for the body of my notification. So I've got progress bar update demo and 2 progress bars. They should update dynamically. So what I'm doing here is I'm mixing updatable strings with static strings. What happens when you send your notification through is if there's anything, like say for example, I put parent value in here, but I missed it from my data binding, when I send my notification, that would become a static string, i.e. I'd strip away those those curly brackets, and it wouldn't be updatable. And you do have to provide all of your data bindings up front. Like I said, you can't add additional placeholders later on. So sorry, I know that's a bit of a whirlwind tour. I will say all of this code is up on GitHub, and I'll have a link at the end. So if you do want to go through this at your own pace, and read through the docs and try it yourself, absolutely go for it. It's the sort of thing where the results coming up down the bottom here look quite nice, but it's probably a bit overwhelming trying to talk through it all in like an hour. So like I said, we've got text, providing that to new burnt toast notification, got a unique identifier, got our progress bars like text, the order matters. So the first progress bar you provide shows at the top, and then additional ones show underneath that in order. And I think the maximum you can have is 5 progress bars. That's the most I've ever had anyway, I think. One of my demos for this is showing the amount of available toner in a printer, and I'm trying to remember how many colors they have. So yes, progress bars and then data binding again. Now that's going to show my initial toast. I'm not going to dive into the function, but I do have a function here that starts ticking through and updating my notification, and it goes for about a minute. So I'm going to take that opportunity to have some water while it goes. So I'm not going to dive into the function because it has a lot of whole extra stuff you don't need to worry about. The bit that is important though is oh, right, I'll call it down here. So I provide to that function my data binding and my ID, and inside the function it updates my various placeholders and uses my ID to call update BT notification with the updated data binding. And you'll notice also that it's null equals. That's to avoid getting spammed with these succeeded things, because I think it updates every second or every half second. So we end up with a lot of them. But if I run this, we can see now that, all right, the guts of this is using a function that I created for the start of my live streams. So I've got stream starting soon. This would normally tick up 5 minutes. But for this, I've made it 40 seconds. So it just goes along for the full duration of how long the function will run. And then there's these child ones that have random amounts of time, but a heck of a lot quicker, so it goes through them. And you can see the percentages there updating. And also, keep in mind while you're watching this, I didn't specify a duration. So every time you update a notification, it resets the timer for how long it stays on screen. So if you really want a toast to stay on screen forever, you can just keep updating it. As long as the user doesn't get rid of it by clicking on it or dismissing it, it's going to stay on screen because you've got that 5 seconds window. As long as you update it, say every 3 seconds, it's just going to stay there. So I did say it's kind of hacky, but that's a way of getting it on screen for forever. Before I go on, are there any questions at this point?
We had a question in chat about if you keep providing status updates, does that keep the toast up regardless of the duration setting? But you did answer that,
Yes.
so you caught that
Yeah,
one.
yes, absolutely. Cool. So on to yes.
I actually have a quick one. So,
Yeah.
would something like this work with like a scheduled job or something like that in the background? Like, would it pop up notifications successfully in that situation?
Yes. So the thing is the toast needs to be generated as the user. So if your scheduled task runs as you, it'll show perfectly fine. If it's running as system or some other account, it needs to be kicked over to the interactive user. And there's a couple of community modules out there like invoke command as, and there's another one there specifically for RMM tools. But then what you can do is have the bulk of your script running as system, and then you say, hey, invoke this command as Josh, and then do the toast part of it, which works quite well.
Cool. Thanks.
So on to the brand new stuff, which is what's really, really cool. So I've been working on Burnt Toast for just over 5 years now. And you'll remember at the start, one of the things I said about notifications is that they should ideally be actionable. So far, all you've seen is notifications that show information. We haven't been able to use them to take further action or, take further action. So recently, with the same stuff that separates PowerShell 7.1 so PowerShell 7.1 has unlocked some new functionality because of a change that was forced down from the .NET team. But the result of that is now we've got events working. So toast notifications have events. In fact, if I've still got that object here, toast get. So a toast object has 3 events: activated, dismissed, and failed. Activated is when you click on a toast or when you click a button or interact with a notification. Dismissed is when it either leaves the screen or the user clicks that little arrow to get it off the screen. And failed, I've never got to happen. But maybe it was invalid XML or something. Up until recently, and still now if you use an older version of PowerShell, if you tried registering any of these events, you'd get a message saying, no, PowerShell doesn't do WinRT events, sorry, go away. Now it's working, which means we can register events. And I'm only just scratching the surface of this stuff in these demos, but it's unlocked so much potential. What I've done to make using these events easy is there's 2 parameters on new burnt toast notification: activated action and dismissed action. Each of those just take a script block. So script block. And so you can provide whatever you want. Any valid PowerShell code within that script block. It could be writing to a file. It could be calling another function. It could be changing the system time for some reason. You can do it. To demonstrate this, I've got two script blocks, one for activated, one for dismissed, and they both just write warnings to the console, activated and dismissed, just so we can see what action caused what event to trigger. Then I'm also taking the automatic variable event from inside my event and popping it into a global variable just so we can interact with it a bit outside of our toasts to see the result. So if I call this, it's going to look like the default notification. So this is the default burnt toast notification. If I click it, I get warning activated. If I dismiss it, I get warning dismissed. And if I show it and let it go off screen, I get warning dismissed as well. So that means my little script blocks here are executing. And in theory, just taking a peek at, yeah, okay, cool. That means I can now look at toast event and see information about my event. So most of this is all just standard event object stuff. The thing we're really interested in is the source args, which we can see specific stuff in there about why was this dismissed. So if we look at the source args, there's two objects in here. The first one is the metadata that surrounds the toast notification that generated the event. So this content is the XML document for our toast notification. So we could go and inspect that if we wanted to. There's data here. That would be our data binding if we'd provided the data binding. There is priority. There is tag. So those unique identifiers, those are actually group and tag. I just haven't found a reason to separate them out. So when you provide a unique identifier, I put it on both the tag and the group. It's just a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. But if I look at that second object, this is information about why the event was triggered. So with the dismissed event, I see a reason with timed out, and that's because our last example had it disappearing off screen. If I run this again and dismiss it, we will see that the reason was user cancelled. And just for completeness, if I click it and go, if I generate it and click on it, now my source args are a different object, and it tells me arguments and user input, and we'll dive into these in a sec. So it's just one thing to be aware of. Dismissed has 2 properties, activated has 3. What that means is we can get a little bit more particular about our dismiss notifications, or yeah, we can be more specific about what we're doing when the notification is dismissed. So I can dive into that reason from here and figure out, okay, if I was timed out, is tell the user to wake up. If the user cancelled it, fine, didn't want to talk to them anyway. If it was something else, I don't know what another valid dismissed reason is. I haven't had enough time to dive into that yet, but if something else happens to come up, that's a little bit awkward. So let's run this. And if I let it go off screen, we get, hey, wake up. If we run it again and dismiss it, we get, fine, I didn't want to talk to you anyway. And just for completeness, if I click it, it still says activated. So we're getting all this stuff for all these events happening when we dismissed our notification with the dismiss action. So you would think if I put a button on there specifically to dismiss the toast, that would also trigger the dismissed action. So there's a system specific type of button called dismiss, and you can create one using this handy dandy command. And when you create buttons, you can provide them to your toast via the button parameter. But if we run this and I click dismiss, guess what's going to happen? Activated. And if we look at the source args, we can see that the argument was dismiss. So that's great. So buttons and the toast themselves have arguments sitting behind the scenes. All the dismiss button did, though, is add an argument behind it that says dismiss, but it still triggered the activated, which is a bit of a pain. And what that means is if we're using a dismissed button, we now have to check if it activated the arguments to see if it was dismissed. Then we can take specific actions if we want to, if that's the case. Otherwise, we've still got our generic activated. So if I call that again, go dismissed, we've now got actively dismissed. And if I click that, actually, that's not the one I want. If I do that and activate it without clicking that, then we've got the regular activated. Now, the heck was I doing with this one? Oh, right. So I was talking about how the toast itself had a argument behind it. You can specify that using this launch option when you're doing your new BT content. So this is one of those examples where you've got to dive back into the advanced functions and build out the component pieces of your toast rather than just using new BT notification. So we've got launch and body click. So what we're going to do here is display our more fully formed toast. And if I click that and look at the source args now, I can see an argument of body click. So now I can distinguish between, okay, the user clicked the body of my, and to be clear, that launch, this argument can be anything. So what this means is now I can take different actions based on whether a specific button was pressed, whether the body was pressed, whether the user dismissed it. Yeah, lots of options. Now, this user input one is interesting. So it's a bit of a spoiler. There is a selection box that you can use. There's also a text input box. So what you could do is say, pop up a toast with a text box. You could ask the user for the path to a file and they can type it in. And then you can pull it from the user input of the event and trigger the next script in a chain of scripts. But what we're going to do instead is a selection box. I'm not going to talk through this whole thing, or at least I'm going to cover it very briefly because I think we're
We have one quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Stephen Judd asked, is this PTR, which I'm assuming means pointer, a random value from the event object? I think that's where it was.
I believe so. It's definitely not something I've had to deal with. I'm not sure. Is it different every time? Yeah, it's different every time. So it might tie through to the what was that? 5552. I was going to say it might point through to tie it to this bit, but No. So I don't know. It's definitely not something I've had to worry about yet. So taking events to the next level using a selection box. I'll ignore that for a bit. So I'm generating a toast notification. I've got all of this stuff is all standard. We've seen it before. Then I've got 4 items here, and they are selection box items, all with a unique ID and all with content. This content is what shows in the list of selection box items. And then you group them all into a input object. So we give that an ID as well. Give it a title, so this is what shows just above the selection box. And then you can choose which items select by default, and that is matching up with the ID from there. And then again, list out all the items, and the order that they show there is the order they'll show within the selection box. Then we've got a submit button and a dismiss button, and we have a toast. And it's again got a activated action. So that activated action. With the selection box, we've got these IDs for the different items. And they show under that user input, that user input property, making sure I pick the right word, user input. So whatever the ID of the selected item will show under user input, which means we can take action based on which one was selected. So we've got in my 4 items, each of those reference a different GIF that's sitting under my demo files. And they're all creating a new text element for a toast. What I do with that is generate a new toast. So here we're going to have a toast that shows a selection box. Based on our selection from that selection box, we end up with a second toast. So it's actually kind of better to just see this thing work. So here we go. We've got a new batch of GIFs, and we want to select one. You'll see there's one selected by default. So if I just click submit, it disappears, and we get the Picard GIF. If I run that again and open the selection box, I see my list. And so I pick Seinfeld, click submit, I get that GIF. And you can see that's a hero image that's displaying my GIF in a nice big window. And just one more time. Let's go here, Bob Ross. All right. So, like I said, that's a fairly substantial script block that we're passing in. It's taking on user input and all sorts. It's yeah, you can do a lot with it. Now, really quickly, last demo is the newest thing for Burnt Toast, which are columns. I won't talk through all of this. I'll just end up showing you the result. Basically, what this is, it's from a music ticker that I created for my live stream. So when I'm playing music, when the track changes, I want to show using a toast notification what the current track playing is. And long story short, the music app that I use writes a text file to my hard drive. When the track changes, I monitor that text file for changes, and I read out the information and feed that into a notification. It also includes the somewhere the cover artwork automatically as well, so I can just reference that in my toast. But just showing the information didn't quite look nice enough. And what I've ended up doing is creating these columns. Behind the scenes, they're known as adaptive groups. And what that allows you to do is have a group with columns inside it. So I end up with text elements using the same text function that we've used before, but now we can apply styles to them. And what I have is two sets of text, a bunch of labels, and a bunch of information. Then I group these into columns again with the order that I want them shown in, so top to bottom. And weights. These are relevant to relative to each other. So I could make these 20 and 60, the result would be the same. It's the relative difference between the two. Then something we haven't seen yet is my audio I've set to silent. That's because these notifications are telling me about music, and I don't want the toast to interrupt the music. And because 5 seconds wasn't quite long enough on stream for it to actually register with the viewer, or at least it didn't register with me, I set the duration to long. So if I run that, we get now playing. There's the album art, and here's my 2 columns. So it's a really nice way of showing densely packed information. And you can have more columns, although the columns aren't bound to the width of your toast. So if you had something long in the 3rd column, it would just run off the screen. And you may wonder, why didn't I put the image, the album cover, as a hero image? That's because the hero image has it has a maximum height. So I was only seeing about that much of the album cover, and yeah, it didn't look too good. So we put it in there instead. So that's the brand new hotness. I haven't had a chance to blog about it or document it or anything yet. This is literally all the documentation I have at hand. Because I've been mousing over it, that's going to stay on screen for ages. So that's all of my demos. If you want to get your hands on these, head to toast.click/talks. There is already all of these files and this slide deck, though there's not much in it other than a couple of links for this one. So if you're interested, definitely go and pick through the demos, try them out yourself. Remember that some of them, especially the events, will only work on PowerShell 7.1. And also with Burnt Toast, if you're using toasts in your own projects, feel free to use Burnt Toast or rip it apart and see how it works and re-implement it yourself. And I'm always happy to take suggestions and pull requests and stuff on the GitHub repo. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And I thanks for presenting. That was actually crazy detailed. I did not know how details you could get with toast notifications, but here we are, you know?
Yeah.
That was awesome.
It's one of those topics where once I get started, I can, being my niche, it's something I can talk about forever. So yeah.
And I don't think people realize how valuable stuff like that is for their own personal projects until they know they can do it. You know, like I would have had no idea you could do that.
Yep.
So we had one question in or 2 questions actually from Justin in chat. He asked, do the notifications leave any artifacts in the notification center? And he asked what the style parameter does. Right. He said, I don't think you've mentioned it.
Sure. So sorry, that style. So yes, they do. If you've clicked that little arrow that says send to Action Center, I'm not sure. Can you see my Action Center on screen at the moment?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So if you click that little arrow, and of course it's been replaced by an X now, it does send it into the Action Center. And if you let it time out, it goes to the Action Center as well. So what tends to happen after these presentations is I have a nice little running history of all sorts. So I can see all the GIFs that I didn't dismiss. All of this stuff. Progress bars. So there's the 100%, 100%. So and of course it's really bad for me at the moment because I am actively presenting a lot of use cases. But yes, if you're sending through notifications and they don't get actioned, they will end up in the action center. So you don't have to worry. Well, depending on how your users work, because I know some people don't. If a notification's not on screen, then they wouldn't have a clue where to see it again. But yes, they do end up in the action center. The style only works in these columns, and this is an example of two styles. So this style is called base, and it just makes it bolder. This one is base subtle, something like that. It makes it bold but also grey. So I use base for my labels and then the subtle one for the actual text. Oh, and one thing I forgot. Through all of that, I had my focus assist turned on. And you will have noticed that I had no issues getting the notifications showing up. That is because in my settings, under notifications, there are focus. Is it under focus assist? It is too. So I've currently got focus assist set to priority only. And if I go to my priority list, I have Windows PowerShell set as a app that's allowed to break through my focus assist. Which is why I don't get notifications from Slack and Outlook and stuff, but I do get my notifications from PowerShell. So that's one way of managing your own notification load, if you're worried about that, because of course, when you first think about sending yourself notifications, you go, oh, that means I've got to turn Focus Assist on and get all those other notifications. No, just set Windows PowerShell as a priority app and they'll come through fine.
Another question, do the Action Center notifications persist after the PowerShell process exits?
Yes. So once they're sent, they're sent. And did I clear? Oh, I did clear them. Oh no, they're still there. So they're all there. And in fact, one thing, these are all coming up under Windows PowerShell, but I wasn't actually using Windows PowerShell to send them. I was using PowerShell 7.1. But if I do go and explicitly close VS Code, they're all still there. So yes, they persist. I don't think they stay after a reboot though. They might, because there's a and I've closed it. There is a specific setting for whether or not a toast stays after a reboot, like whether it automatically dismisses. And I'm not sure what the default there is. I should probably look that up. Oh, and you can also continue updating these. So as long as you still have or can recreate the data binding and you know what the unique ID is, you can create your toast, update them, close your PowerShell session, open a new one, and still update the toasts again. Because at that point, they're handled by the operating system. What won't work, though, are events. So those are a PowerShell feature. So once PowerShell closes, those events are deregistered and they go nowhere anymore. Why don't reading chat. So the only stuff that requires version 7.1 is the events. everything else works in 5 and above. Only on Windows 10 though. I had to drop support for Windows 8 begrudgingly. Although if anyone's still using Windows 8.1 and wants toast notifications, I've got an old version of Burnt Toast that'll work just fine for you. We'll just trigger a SCCM upgrade. Oh yeah, and on my blog there's a ongoing series called Crouton where basically if I've found myself having to document something, I tend to document it on my blog under the Crouton banner. So there's a lot there. Yes, there's a lot there. Yes, I like my toast-related puns. So I still tend to use both. I use VS Code and haven't had any issues with it for developing my modules. If I'm just doing a bits of script that doesn't fit into an overall module, I still just do it in the ISE. But yeah, so in VS Code, I do use the PowerShell preview extension, and that's been working really well for me. Mr. Judd, this is a pie-free zone.
What was with this module, what was the hardest problem you ran into with it that you've had to solve?
So right off the bat, I'm going to ignore the event stuff because that was more of a back-end engine thing that I didn't, in the end, had no control over. The initial hardest thing was figuring out how to import those the WinRT runtimes that are required. So the Windows API that handles toast notifications are all WinRT things, which are interesting to work with. And you can't just go add type WinRT whatever. It's some really weird syntax, and I stumbled across someone else that had done it for something similar, and I went, okay, but can I get that to work? And but once that was sorted, everything was fine. And early versions as well, behind the scenes, were directly authoring XML, which was a royal pain, and I had to learn a lot about XML. But now I use a .NET library from Microsoft. It's the Microsoft Community Toolkit, which abstracts a lot of that away, but it's still very .NET-y. So a lot of what Burnt Toast is abstracting that away and making it something that would be more natural for a PowerShell script to use.
Haven't seen any more questions in chat. There's one.
Oh. I haven't, but maybe. Of course, you could simplify that a little bit as well. Would you mind popping that in as a discussion or an issue on the Burnt Toast repo? Because I will think on that. Just popping the link in. I see Teams doesn't like my link. And shameless self-promotion, in a little over half an hour at the PowerShell 24-hour conference, I've got a session on for Burnt Toast as well, but that goes, it's a lot shorter of a demo, and it covers a lot of the basics and then some of this advanced stuff at a very surface level. So if you're interested, do check that out. I don't have a link handy for that one though. Yeah, there you go. And so I'm always available to talk problems, use cases, requests, anything. I'm always really interested in hearing how people are using this thing, because it does get, even before the glitches on the PowerShell gallery, it gets an insane number of downloads, and I'm not sure where it's being used. Like, someone has to be deploying this thing across a huge network, and I'm yet to find out who. Or they've gotten in a build script that runs a lot for reasons. Yeah, I think I'm going to make myself a coffee. So thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Oh no, I really appreciate you coming on and doing that, especially with such a short window of time between now and when you present next. So thanks for making the time for us.
That's all right. No, I really enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.